And today we would like to welcome Julia Heuritsch from the Humboldt University in Berlin. And she's a very interesting person. She did a bachelor and a master in astrophysics. She studied in Leiden. And then she kind of switched into the meta-analysis of astronomical research and research production in general. And I hope she will also tell us some more about how her where her motivation comes from, but yeah, and of course about the results of her PhD that she's carrying out in Berlin.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Friedrich. Yeah, so about my motivation, as you said, I did my bachelor and master's in astronomy because I always, since I was 5 years old, I wanted, nothing else than discovering the most fundamental laws of the universe. So for me, it was quite clear, like, that's the only thing I want to do in my life. But then I was quite disappointed about how the system in science works. And I think I was too naive and romantic about it. But anyways, I couldn't, get over that. And I felt like if I continue with a PhD in astronomy, I would really sell my soul to the publish or perish devil. And I couldn't, I couldn't do that. So that's why I decided to not do a PhD in astronomy. Then just by coincidence, I got to know about this field that is called science studies. It's a subfield of the social sciences that does, as you said, Friedrich, it does this meta research, so research about research. And I thought, okay, well, I'd still be in the system, but at least maybe I can do something about it. And that was my motivation to switch into that field. And as a friend once put it, he said, well, I'm now doing a PhD about the topic why I didn't want to do a PhD in astronomy. So yeah, that's the little background about it. All right, so with that, I start, I guess. Yeah, so my research, my junior research group is called Reflexive Metrics because we all look at what kind of consequences does the use of metrics such as publication rates or citation rates have. Is there somebody saying something? No?
I think there are a couple of unmuted microphones. If you can all please mute. Thanks.
So yeah, and if you have an immediate question, then please feel free to ask. If it's more general, then maybe it's better to discuss it at the end. But if it's something like to understand, then please ask right away. So yeah, we all in our research group, we look at like what consequences does it have that we measure people's performance by metrics such as citation and rates and publication rates. That's our general topic, and I specifically look at the situation in astronomy. So, oops, that was not the right button. Okay, that was it. So a few theories, a few sociological theories go into my research, of course, and one of them is one strand is the sociology of quantification and the sociology of evaluation. So basically, what happens when you quantify things, when you put numbers on things that maybe first, was more qualitative. And a big question in those fields is, of course, hey, what is actually quality in science? How can you describe it? What does it mean? How can you measure it? And that has become an even bigger topic with the last few decades, where accountability and performance have become really much more important in science also. And so there's this thing that we call commensurability, and so that's basically a character of numbers, which means that numbers can rate and rank, of course. So metrics in that way, they kind of objectify and enable comparison. So once you describe something on a scale, then you can compare it more easily, right? And so that's, of course, the benefit of metrics. But also, at least for me, I don't know how you feel about it, but as me, at least for me, as you know, as a physicist, as an astronomer, I look quite naively at things like statistics. I look at it as something that is describing things, but in reality, then what happens is that it's also prescribing things, because it puts ideas into people's minds, and that's how it also changes the world. And as astronomers, I think we are, or at least me, we are a bit naive about it, because we only look at objects quite far away that we can't really influence, right? And so that was for me also a big insight of like, yeah, wow, if you actually press things into numbers, it has consequences. And so when every difference is expressed through numbers, then something can arise that we call the evaluation gap. And that is basically, do you see my mouse on the screen? Yeah.
Yes.
So that is basically, if you have for a concept like, for example, scientific quality, and you try to measure it, so basically the indicator is a proxy for that scientific quality, you inevitably have a validity problem. So it's only a proxy, right? But then people start acting according to what the indicator tells you to do. For example, an indicator that is valued is publication rate. So people try to publish more. And so that leads to actions that, of course, don't really correspond to what initially scientific quality means. And so you get what we call unintended consequences. Like, for example, yeah, that the quality goes down, that you have an information overload, that you start doing things with authorship that are not maybe that fair, unhealthy competition, you try to avoid risks so that you can publish more safely, and things like that. So that's the first important concept that I use in my studies. And then because of that characteristic that I mentioned before, so that numbers don't only describe, but they also prescribe, that's what we call the performativity of numbers. So basically, numbers are reactive. They have authority, they attribute quality. They don't necessarily only describe it, what we maybe intend to do at first, but then they actually define what quality is. And that's what we call the constitutive effects. So basically, in that graphic, you see there is no gap anymore, because in the end, your indicator defines what or prescribe how you should act, and the whole way of how this functions then is that you get this idea in your mind also what quality means. So you basically redefine quality in that process according what the indicator describes. That's what we call constitutive effects. Yeah, here, nice citations. You can read them if you want. But basically, that's how indicators affect research agendas, behavior, and knowledge production. And for me, it was interesting to find out, because in the sociology, well, in the science studies, there is basically fights about, hey, is there an evaluation gap or is it constitutive effects, you know? So is there a gap, or are we redefining what quality is, and so there is no problem, so to say? But for me, I thought, it's actually interesting. Maybe it can be both, you know? Maybe there is a gap, but we're also redefining what quality is. So for me, it was really an interesting question to see, okay, what do we observe in astronomy? Is there an evaluation gap? Other constitutive effects? Is the definition of quality changing? What does quality actually mean? And what are the effects of indicator use, such as publication rates and citation rates, on the research quality? So those are my most important questions. And I also had the aim that I would find ideas for innovative indicators that would kind of utilize those effects, you know, to close that gap. So yeah, that was my very ambitious goal, and I don't know if I will reach that at the end of the PhD, but I'm still having my hopes up. So my methods, I won't talk much about methods because I think that's actually really boring. But if at the end you have questions about that, I'm of course very happy to answer. But just to give you a very general overview, I used a mix of qualitative and quantitative approaches. And so as for qualitative, I did interviews with 28 international astronomers that are all at different career stages. So PhD students, postdocs, assistant professors, associate professors, and full professors. I did a document analysis, especially of the annual and self-evaluation reports of Leiden University. A literature review, of course, so there is already there is already some literature in the science studies about astronomy, so that meta kind of research, but of course not enough, but I tried to incorporate that, of course, also in my research. And then the last thing that I did is a quantitative web-based survey of astronomers worldwide. I'm going to talk very shortly at the end about it, but I'm mainly focusing on the results of my first two papers for the main presentation. All right, so about the results. So first, as I said, I wanted to find out, hey, what does quality actually mean for an astronomer? And maybe opposed to that, what does quality mean? What is measured really by an indicator? And what are the effects of a potential evaluation gap on research behavior and knowledge production processes? And the window is always in my way. So is there an evaluation gap? Is there constitutive effects? What exactly is going on? And that's so basically the order in which I'm going to present the results right now. So what is research quality in astronomy? I think you all know that. In very condensed and short, people answered, it's when it's pushing knowledge forward, it's truth finding, it's supporting the endeavor to discover and to understand better. We want to find out like how the universe works. We want to find out what is the reality behind everything. And astronomers are quite clear on that. So we know that we might ever only approximate reality and we can never really fully access it, but at least we have that goal, that we want to get as close as possible. And that's how we define scientific quality. So basically, quality in astronomy is really when the scientific theory has a good correspondence with reality. And so I condensed 3 criteria of scientific quality in astronomy. The first one is to ask an important question that pushes knowledge forward. The second one is methodological correctness, of course. And the third one is clear communication of conclusions. So people said, okay, well, it's not only enough, to have correct results and that may add something to the field. You also have to communicate that in a way that people understand and that people can do something with it. And of course, with this criteria also, that implies replicability. And then, as opposed to that, what is perceived to be valued? So as in measured by indicators, but also I ask people, okay, what do you think, is valued when you need to climb up the career ladder and things like that? What do people look at? And so, that's publications and citations, recognition through observation time and grants. It's more like sexy topics that count. So with fancy names and maybe, topics that are in fashion at the moment. It needs to promise impact, whatever that means. Many people also mentioned luck because they said, oh yeah, I mean, competition is so high that you can write a super great proposal, but then it's basically a draw who is going to get it. And then there's something that we call the Matthew effect. And that means that the more you have, so for example, the more recognition you have, the more you get, because then you have your reputation, and that means you can get more grants, and that means you can get more observation time, and etc., etc., etc. So one interviewer also called that the chicken and the egg problem, because where do you start? You need kind of recognition to get further, but you need to start building your recognition. So yeah, what I want to point out here also is the difference between the intrinsic motivation for an astronomer to perform research, and that is mainly based on curiosity and pushing knowledge forward, whereas there's an extrinsic motivation, and that is determined by what what indicators value. So basically, you have to publish to, you know, go climb up the career ladder to be able to do the research that you want to do, right? So this gap has some consequences, and one of that is that people have, well, develop a kind of output orientation and feel publication pressure. Why? Well, because, you know, because of these quantitative measurements, they define the value of an astronomer. And that quantitative output becomes the driving factor. The motivation kind of shifts from truth finding to result generation. And people call that the emergency to publish. That kind of gives you a publication pressure. And yeah, well, you've all heard, I guess, about publish or perish. And that has effects on quality. A focus on sexy topics, I already mentioned that, because you have to kind of play it safe also. And yeah, people also mentioned that publication pressure doesn't necessarily always have to be a bad thing. We'll get back to that also with competition. But so astronomers do recognize that things like publication pressure and competition can be a driving factor. It doesn't have to be only bad for your motivation or for the quality of your research. And so I looked into certain things. For example, what we call salami slicing. Salami slicing, I don't know if you know that term, but it's when you try to get as many publications out of your research as possible. And so astronomers say, yeah, that happens, but you know, it's actually not that bad, because well, that way you get things out quicker, and also you make it more readable. So that didn't seem too much of a problem. And then I looked at what I call premature publishing. So, you know, because of the pressure to get things out quickly, do people get things out that are maybe not that certain yet, that you're not that sure about yet, that you haven't really verified yet? And that's definitely something that astronomers complain about, that this is happening more than it should. Although also there was mentioned the positive aspect that then that newly acquired knowledge gets faster to the community, and you can start discussions about it. And as I mentioned before, replicability is kind of implicit in the quality criteria. And that was one of the biggest topics that was criticized, because there's too little incentive to make your research available in a really replicable way, as in that you would also publish code, for example, or data. So yeah, this the way how we attribute values to researcher, of course, has an impact on people's careers. You need to make decisions according to, okay, what can I afford, you know? Can I concentrate a bit more on the quality of this paper, or should I get it out quicker because, you know, I have to publish something in this year? One interviewer called it the golden child trajectory, that you really have that pressure to go from PhD right to postdoc, then to assistant professor, associate professor, and professor, and that it feels like kind of a rat race to do those steps. Yeah, so astronomers do feel competition, and part of that is telescope applications deadlines that actually set natural deadlines. That was what was mentioned. People said, oh yeah, well, that's kind of a natural deadline. That's when all the papers need to be out. And yeah, I think this is all of that. So astronomers do like to collaborate, but they also need to make sure that their PhDs get their papers out so that they can finish in time. So that's an important aspect when that you need to consider, okay, can I afford that collaboration now or not, and what does my PhD get out of it? Yeah. So, and an interesting topic was also the relation between riskiness, failure, and negative results. I mentioned that already, because astronomers, they agree that, hey, negative results are important because they show you what doesn't work, and if you don't report on that, somebody else is repeating this without knowing that it has already done. So it's just a waste of people's times and resources. But the problem is that you can only often publish it when you can tell that you added something new, for example, upper or lower limits and things like that. So you always have to kind of filter something out of your research, package it in a way that it's new and exciting, and sell it like that. And if you can't do that, then those negative results are not really publishable. And that is also why people refrain from topics that are more risky. So in the sense that you don't know if you actually can get publishable results out of it. And astronomers find that really sad because, they say, hey, that's the topics how you can really push knowledge forward. That's where all the potential lies in. But you need to have really reached a status where you can afford that. Let me see the time, so maybe I'll go quicker through that. I just want to briefly mention these 5 domains that Dahler-Larsen is the guy that came up with this term constitutive effects. So basically, these are just 5 examples of how you can see that indicators have real consequences on things. So they don't only measure it, but they also define and shape what is going on. I will not go through the slides because we don't have enough time, and I've actually already mentioned those things. I just wanted to put it in a different way, also to look at a different angle because that's sometimes interesting. But so basically my main conclusion was that there's 2 opposite notions of science that an astronomer holds. One is the ideal view. So for example, we are doing this science because we want to push knowledge forward. We want to write papers about it because we want to bring it out. Victor, can you please
muteate, porfa.
Okay. We want to we want to publish papers because we want to get our science out. But on the other hand, there is the system that requires us to publish quickly and to, that we cannot publish negative results and all of that. And then a third notion arises out of it, which is what I call the balancing act. So astronomers try, because they have this really big intrinsic motivation that is not affected that much by indicators. That is, doing astronomy because you want to know stuff about the universe. But then you also have that other thing, okay, but I also need to publish papers. And, we always have to find a balance between those two. Oh, I think, yeah. And so here, this is how I visualized the evaluation gap, basically. And this is based on what we call the Coleman boat in social sciences. And I find that really interesting. That's why I want to go into detail here. You basically have a macro phenomenon, a kind of social situation, and then you try to explain through going through the micro level how another macro phenomenon comes into place. And those macro phenomena could be anything. It could be war, it could be friendship, it could be anything. And you try to explain that why are going through the micro level. And of course, as an astronomer, I think you can understand, I find that fascinating, right? Because we always try to, look a level deeper. Okay, so what is the atom made of, and what is the quark made of, and stuff like that. And this is kind of represented in this Coleman boat. And so that's how I visualized the evaluation gap. So basically, you by performing quantitative evaluation, you reach a state where people necessarily have to value quantity over quality, and that is how you have a gap between what you aimed at, actually. So the quantitative evaluation was aimed at good quality research and performance, but in the end you don't get that, but you get more quantity than quality. I want to quickly go into the theory that I used in my second paper to make sense of all of that, and to really explain how does the evaluation gap come into place. And so this theory, I applied it to the Coleman boat. That's how I got those results. And I think I love this theory, so I hope you love it too. So basically, in order to go from here to there, you first have to explain the logic of an actor's situation. And that is comprised of 4 constituents. That is the internal one, so your identity, your values, your dreams and hopes and wishes. You have an external one, material opportunities, and that's capital, all sorts of capital, like, for example, telescope time, publications, citations, your collaborators, your network, your supervisor, all sorts of things that you can phrase as capital go into here. And then you have another external component of the situation, which is institutional rules. So what counts? What are the rules? What, implicit or explicit? What is valued in your organization, in your institute, in the system of science? That's what goes into here. And then the third external frame is called the cultural frame. And this includes things like symbols. So how do you interact? How do you know what is valued? Because, you need, for example, a non-smoker symbol, that gives you the indication, okay, I cannot smoke here. And you can translate that to of course, more abstract things. So yeah, we don't need to go through all of that. You don't have to read all of that. I just find it so fascinating that institutional norms, they have basically 3 functions: the orientation function, organization function, and endowment of meaning function. So basically, norms give you meaning. They tell you, hey, what is good or what is bad. That's how you get orientation. And organization function, of course, well, with rules, we all know what to do, so things are less chaotic. And in my second paper, I really went through all of the steps of this Coleman boat, which includes describing all components of the situation and what rules and norms are prevalent in astronomy, to in the end arrive at an explanation of the evaluation gap. I won't go into the results of that because most of it I have already mentioned. but I did want to, you know, show this theory to you because I really love it. It's called rational choice theory, by the way. And rational choice, I have to mention that, doesn't mean what we usually understand as rational in daily life, as in like putting a lot of cognitive resources, but it means that everything has a reason. All behavior has reason. And if you look at the logic of the situation and everything at play, you can explain what happened. And yeah, I love this theory. All right, a few short words about the survey that I did last autumn till February, I think. I sent this survey to astronomers worldwide, mainly, well, to all members of the International Astronomical Union and also astronomy institutes. My independent variables were publication pressure, organizational justice. So, you know, if you followed me on the rational choice theory, then of course it becomes obvious that, hey, all these organizational things like climate and justice and stuff like that, they really influence us, and they tell us what is valued and what we can do and what we can't do. So it turns out that if you feel treated fairly, well, then you are also more likely to behave in a fair way. And the opposite, if you feel treated unfairly, you're more likely to perform scientific misconduct. Overcommitment, this is, you know, things like, oh, I couldn't sleep at night because I'm always thinking about my work and stuff like that. And my dependent variables are scientific misbehavior and quality. Quality, I operationalized that through the 3 criteria that I carved out through my qualitative research. And my control variables are gender, position, and whether you're academic or non-academic, because I also surveyed people, for example, at NASA and ESA and things like that. In total, 2000, well, slightly over 2000 academics responded to my survey, and nearly 400 non-academics. And so again, these are just really like my tentative results for now. The publication pressure depends on a few variables. And so when you're male, you're less likely to perceive publication pressure than when you're female. When you're a PhD, postdoc, or assistant professor, you're more likely to perceive publication pressure than a full professor. And when you're academic, you're also more likely to perceive publication pressure than when you're non-academic. When you have less published papers, so when you have under 40 papers, you feel more publication pressure than compared to over 100, which makes sense. And your perception of distributed and organizational justice depends on your publication pressure. So if you feel more publication pressure, you feel less justice, you feel treated less fairly. You feel more justice when you're male, and less justice when you have a lower position. So the outlook, what am I going to do with these results? Well, I do want to, of course, my biggest goal is to say something about the impact on quality. And so this is like my very first plot I did about it. And you can see here on the x-axis the frequency with which misbehavior occurs. And then you see on the y-axis what impact that specific item of misbehavior. So in total, it's 18 items. What impact on quality does that have? And so, of course, this quadrant means high frequency and high impact. And so these items of misbehavior are basically the worst. And it's for each item, I have 3 different kind of impacts on quality because I operationalized that through my different criteria. If you want, of course, we can look at it later, hey, which items are which and stuff, but just to give you a short idea of what I'm intending to do next. So part of my survey was asking about intrinsic and extrinsic motivations to publish. I want to do something with that. You know, maybe get a relationship with the publication pressure, with misconduct and stuff like that. And my final goal of my PhD thesis, as I already mentioned, is what we call an evaluation inquiry. So basically, hey, asking the community, asking the astronomers directly, what would you wish that is valued? Okay, so I ask at the end of the survey, ask some miracle questions, or something like, hey, in an ideal world, what would you like to be measured? Or if you got given, you know, $10 billion, what would you do with that money, and stuff like that. So I want to really get some ideas how we can evaluate better without having those negative consequences on quality. Okay, and that was it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia. And I can only recommend to have a look at these papers, because they're not just good, they're also funny sometimes, especially the ones with the interviews of the Leiden astronomers. I'm sure you find some funny quotes, and also, well, quotes that could have been yours. And I also find interesting how you went from like this description of what is going wrong in science during your early years, now to a more active part. How should we try to change the system, right? And maybe you have some suggestions that you would like to that you can share also.
Yeah. I already have. I can hear myself somehow. I don't know. Is it better now? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, so I had a quick skim through, of course, through the miracle questions already, and I did ask in my interviews about it, and I think one of the biggest things was really targeting replicability. So as in make your code public, but also providing that infrastructure, right? I mean, okay, we can all do that. We can all put our code on GitHub or whatever, but also the ways how papers are written in that old style linear way, you know, like that Einstein communicated with. I mean, it's so outdated. With our technology, we can do so much better. We can interlink knowledge. We don't have to repeat 15,000 times what we have already said in the paper before. We can link it, but we don't do that because that's not how it's done, you know. And also papers get outdated, and then maybe in a later paper you said, oh yeah, that was wrong, but bad luck if you didn't see that later paper and you rely on that paper that is wrong, right? So I feel that that was mentioned a lot, that the way we publish right now is outdated and is inefficient, and people are advocating more for that talks count more, or that blog posts should count more, and that you have that instead of like, yeah, those papers, you should have more direct discussions with people, things like that. Yeah. And so Licia, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question for you. So
Yes.
thank you for a very interesting presentation, and you obviously selected a very hot subject for your study that goes well beyond astronomy. I mean, this is a much wider subject,
Totally.
but you concentrated in astronomy. So so the thing that you just mentioned right now are things that sort of require a change of the system, the way the system works, and that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
From your research, do you have like a guidelines or suggestions or recommendation that you could sort of give to people to different levels to actually improve their chances, given that changing the system, it's going to take a while. I mean, you can sort of nudge the system to change it, and the more senior you are, more possibility you have to do that, but this is not gonna, it's unlikely to happen overnight. But right. Do you have some, or maybe point to some of your paper where you can, maybe when one can learn that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and unfortunately I don't have that ordered yet in my head, because that is the very last step of my PhD, which I'm not yet at. But of course, you're right. Changing the system takes long, but you can start, you know, at the individual level. For example, as a supervisor, communicate about these things open, you know, say, yeah, okay, well, that's the system. Well, you know, we have to do those things. Let's try to get as much quality into this paper as we can. And check with the PhD, hey, what is going on there? You know, what are people's fears? What are people's insecurities? Like, that's all things that we don't openly talk about, and we get more and more to that stage, thankfully. But yeah, it's this culture, not only in science, of course, generally professional working cultures, you know, that we all have to put on our mask when we go to our workplace and act so professionally. And then yeah, people, you know, imposter syndrome, of course. We feel imposter syndrome because we feel like, hey, everybody else has their shit together. It's only me that I'm worried and scared. And I was so lucky, you know, that I got this position, but then other people also were lucky, you know, but nobody talks about that, of course, because we all have to pretend that we are so great. And I think, you know, starting at that level and really openly communicating, you know, I love this Hannah Arendt, the German philosopher. She talked about saying what is, and I really love that. You know, say what is, say what you're scared of, what you feel, what you have to do in this system, and may not like, and yeah, how you can how you can have that balance. I think that's a really important thing.
You also mentioned the fairness, right? So there was this thing of fairness, yeah. And you know, fairness, it's a sort of a very complex and complicated process, but it's really important for the way, I mean, who am I to tell you that?
Definitely,
so
definitely.
Can you elaborate a little bit on this fairness issue? Because it's perceived fairness. There is no absolute fairness, right?
No, of course, that is very good. Very good. That's perceived fairness. And so in my case, I looked at the fairness in peer review, the fairness in telescope application time, time application, and grant application procedures, and research allocation. So for each, I can show you actually. I have my cert book here. For each yeah, for each different kind of organizational justice. So this is research allocation. That's the battery that I used. So it's a whole battery of questions that regard the fairness of research allocation in this case. And then the same with peer review, grant application, and telescope application. They're pretty much the same questions, you know, so that you can compare them, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, maybe you ask a question.
No, so I find it very interesting that the people that believe that they've treated in the past more fairly perceived less pressure and higher, you know, higher. So it's very strange that, because fairness is perceived more than
fairness is perceived. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it makes sense because of what I showed you before, the 3 functions that norms have. You know, if you don't really feel like, hey, there are these norms, but things don't really work like that. Exactly. Then at some point you start thinking, why should I stick to the rules? Right. You know, what do I get out of it? So and that's I will show that slide again. I just love it. You know, this exactly. You can see here that if you don't agree with that function that those norms have, you will have deviant behavior. You will show deviant behavior, of course, because why would you stick to it?
Yes,
You know,
exactly.
there's also super interesting research actually on corruption, that corruption happens if you can't trust the system, right? Because then you're like, okay, well, you know, I better take whatever I can get now because I don't know what happens.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thanks.
Jordi, or sorry, Jordi, I don't know how to pronounce your name.
Yeah, Jordi.
Jordi.
Hi, yeah. Hi, Julia. So, well, very interesting seminar. Thank you very much. And I wanted to ask that, well, I think you mentioned a few cases where, I mean, well, there are problems with the present system where there are often too much pressure to publish, and this has these consequences of sometimes bad quality and so on. So if people put too much weight on highest, you know, publishing as quickly as possible, getting many publications, getting many citations, then this causes a problem with quality, right? So
yeah,
to solve this thing, it seems like one should also think about you know, negative consequences of publishing too much, right? Because otherwise, I mean, people just always keep thinking publish, publish, publish. If your paper is not too good, the worst that can happen is that you don't get many citations and it doesn't count too much. But if there is negative, yeah. So then I just wanted to ask, what do you think about this? For example, in relation to this, you know, something very negative that can happen to a scientist is if you commit scientific fraud, right? That's the worst kind of you know, accusation somebody can get for corrupt behavior in science. Or, but then scientific fraud, to me, it has always seemed unfair that it can only happen to you if you work with data or experiment. If you're a theorist, how can a theorist be accused of scientific fraud? It seems almost impossible. So then, how about theorists who publish too many papers? You know, some of them only have some epsilon difference between one and the other, or some of them are quite irrelevant, or they have some calculations they've done in a very careless way. What should one do about this? I mean, I'm not saying there are too many cases of this, you know, but I think one possible consequence of this bad quality, right, is that you have this decreasing carefulness. So
that it is what?
Decreasing carefulness in publications. And
definitely.
What should one do about this?
Yeah. Yeah. So you're right. With the difference between theoreticians, how do you say that again? And observers, I don't know. I did not observe that, so I cannot say anything about it. But yeah, that's exactly it. So when I talked about scientific misconduct, maybe I should have pointed that out. Those 18 items, that's not outright fraud, you know. I think only one or two is like, one is data fabrication, for example, but most of them are not outright fraud. It's just, you know, careless peer review, questionable authorship practices and stuff like that. Things that where you're like, okay, well, you know, I don't really have the time to check that again, you know, and that's not really fraud, but it's, as you say, careless. Yeah. But you know, but that's part of the balance act, right? To always be like, okay, how much more can I afford? Can I really afford checking that again? Can I afford putting the code online? Or do I not have the time? Or am I scared that people find some bugs, you know? So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question actually.
Well, so maybe just a thought that one way to correct the system might be to put more of these checks that against various kinds of misbehavior, like publishing too much stuff which doesn't have anything valuable in it anymore, or too many papers for too little content or stuff like that.
Yeah, so I think checks would be good, although, you know, that's just treating the symptoms, right? I am more of a fan treating the roots, as in looking, hey, what's going on actually in terms of organizational justice? How can we make the system fairer? How can we value people's research differently than just putting numbers on it. I think that would have more of an impact because it's doing something at the root, right? Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And then Teresa, I think, was next.
Yeah, thanks for the seminar, Julia, very nice. So what is the role of referees and editors of journals? And what kind of, do you have particular recommendations of what they could do to improve a little bit this?
I don't think I have a recommendation at the tip of my mind because that was part of early interviews, but I had to strip down my I had to focus at some point, and then I moved away from journal editors and peer reviewers. I don't think I can say much more smart stuff than you all know, which is, you know, that everybody has too little time. Of course, we're all doing that unpaid, that peer review things, and like, yeah, then professors hand it down to PhDs, whatever, and yeah, these things are happening, right? And then of course there's lots of subjectivity also in peer review, despite being anonymous. I can talk about that, but I think that's all things that you know, and I don't feel that I have, unfortunately, really concrete things to add to that.
Thank you.
So thank you. And Maria, what's next?
Yeah, thanks, Julia, for your talk. I mean, you mentioned during your talk all these telescope applications and so on, but obviously nowadays astronomy is more relying every day on, like, you know, large catalogs, large collaborations. I barely need to write telescope applications anymore. I just go online and download my data from this very large survey that someone has prepared for me. But obviously someone needs to do that. And usually all this work behind these large catalogs is not that much valued in the society, because that usually doesn't lead to publications and so on. Did you find that in your research or your interviews and so on?
So I'm not sure if that's related, but one thing that somebody mentioned is that he would wish for so-called transitive references, so that, you know, like first you have some data, people write something about it, and then maybe people write something about that, but they only reference the paper and not the data anymore, and things like that. And it would be much better if we could, you know, like have references that just a reference system where we can just really track everything down to the original source. Is that related to what you meant or not?
Yeah, maybe somehow, but well, I was also, I mean, I thought also about these large collaborations where there's many people working behind this, and obviously only maybe one of them like signed the paper as a first author, but there's really lots of work behind it that somehow hidden sometimes.
That is true. There's also talks about, you know, abolishing the system of like who is first author and second and whatever. Yeah, I think, you know, the whole way of like how publications are done, including how you do authorship, is just outdated and doesn't work anymore today with how we do science and the technology that we have.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Friedrich. You're on mute, I think. Or did you want to say anything?
Yes, sorry. I have two questions regarding your ongoing work on the big survey. The one is about the plot that you showed with the four quadrants. What is the worst and most frequent misbehavior?
Well, depends on what you look at it. Let's not call out on 8, but let's look at 18 maybe. Let's see. I don't know it by heart, I have to admit. That's the last one. That's biased interpretation of data that distorts results.
Well, yes, pretty frequent. Okay.
And so when I look at the slide again, 18 is here. So that's how, yeah, I mean, it's just above the average of frequency, but has a high impact of quality. In terms of, so impact on validity and impact on communication value. We have 8 here, and that is proposed study questions solely because they are considered a hot topic. And that of course has a big impact on research diversity. Okay. So it happens a lot and it has a big impact. Yeah.
Yeah, true. Okay, and the second question is about the gender aspects that you probably touched, but you kind of hid it behind the phrase, okay, male, if you're male, then you tend to feel less publication pressure.
Yeah,
Can you quantify this?
I could, but I don't know it by heart. I'm sorry. My results are very tentative, and I sorry, I don't have the numbers by heart.
That's potentially very interesting too.
So no, but I will, send to you as soon as it's out. I'll send it to you. Yeah, but it was very interesting to see that in most of the regressions, really male was the gender was quite significant. So yeah, it still seems to be a problem. The gender gap.
Yeah, probably on different levels, right? Like the imposter syndrome is clearly correlated with gender too.
Yeah.
And maybe derived from that, you'd feel more or less publication pressure.
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions, people? Maybe some young people.
Shoot ahead.
If not, then maybe let's close here. We are already past the hour. And
thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. It was really nice. Thanks a lot. And looking forward to the analysis of this IEU study.
I will definitely send it to you as soon as it's out, I promise. And then you can share it with everybody also. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right. Well, have a great day. And thank you so much again for this opportunity to share that with you.